Welcome to this part of the tutorial where we're going to focus on texturing our cube. Now to do this we need Photoshop or GIMP. I'm going to be doing this tutorial in Photoshop CS6, but you should be able to transfer most of the techniques I'm going to show you across. So before we can go into Photoshop, we just need to make a few things, we make a few checks to ensure that we are ready to go across. The first thing we need to do is make sure that if we didn't follow the previous part of the tutorial and we kind of skipped ahead and modeled the crate without following the tutorial, that if you have unwrapped it and you do have your UV space laid out acceptably, that you have rendered that template out, okay, and that you have saved it in a folder anywhere, as long as it's in a readable format, so a bitmap or a JPEG. If you haven't done that and you don't know how to do that, then please feel free to go back to the second part of the first lesson where we look at unwrapping techniques and saving that I'm ready for Photoshop. If you have done that, then you can progress with the tutorial. So the first thing we need to do is open up Photoshop. I've got mine already open. The second thing is we need to go to File, we need to go to Open, and we need to open up our crate_UVW, which is what we should have saved it as. Now, you will notice that I have 3 other images here, and this is going to be the next part of the tutorial. So open this up. The third step is to, in this tutorial anyway, go to Google Images or any other kind of image search engine you can find, and we need to have a look for some crate textures. Now, it doesn't really matter which one we choose. Obviously, it's going to be more beneficial to you guys, and easier, I suppose, in the long run, if we choose a crate texture that doesn't have the slat already textured into it. Now, in the first part of the first lesson, I said that you didn't necessarily have to model the slat, you could just texture it. If you didn't model any of the slats, but you still want them, feel free to pick a texture that has got the slats in it. The reason why I say if you've already modeled the slats not to do this is because it can be a pain aligning this part of the material with the actual geometry. So what we want to do is select something like this. Now the one I chose was this one. Okay. Now obviously it's probably worth noting that if this was a crate that was going into a game that was going to be published, that we'd need some kind of allowances from the creator of the image to make sure that we could use it. But as this is just kind of a practice for later on, any old crate image will do. So once you've found an image, save it in a folder. I've kind of gone a little bit further and downloaded some others as well. So I'm going to create sort of like a pirate crate almost, a crate that's been smuggled. So we have a diffuse base, and I've saved our crate base, if you like, as diffuse base, so that I know if I have lots and lots of different material files in here, that this was the original. This was the original map, if you like. I also downloaded two other images, and these were kind of just kind of add-ons. Now, if you've never used Photoshop before, feel free to just download the diffuse base, get familiar with the UI as we go through this tutorial. If you have used Photoshop before and you're more interested in making things look realistic, or perhaps adding effects or adding layers to this crate, then feel free to also download some extra logos. The 2 I've chosen are a Yorkshire Tea logo. Obviously I know Yorkshire Tea probably weren't around in the 1600s, but I'm going to show you how we can take this logo and make it look kind of worn and old and tattered. And this logo, hopefully you guys recognize it as the East India Trading Company logo, which was around in those days. Alright? So once we've done that, we need to come back into Photoshop, and we need to open up our other images. Okay? So you can just drag select them all, or you can control click, and once you've done that, just click open. And you notice along the top here we have a selection of tabs. Okay, so our diffuse base is on the 4th one, etc., and it works back until we have the first one that we opened. Now, as within 3ds Max, when we render these templates out, sometimes the pixel density, if you like, becomes so small that if you zoom out far enough, it disappears. So if you do have this, don't worry, it's not a problem. If we press Control Plus, or if you're a fan of hotkeys and you don't like using the keyboard and you want to use the mouse, feel free to hold Alt on the keyboard and use wheel mouse to zoom in and out. And when you zoom into a certain point, you will hopefully see that we do have these edges here. Okay. So we have to find some way of getting this material onto our crate. And this kind of is going to happen in two stages. So we have the central section here, and we also have the outside section of our crate. And I know they're in one piece. We can't move them. Obviously, we can't separate them yet. But we have to make each part fit in the different parts of our UV map. All right. So this central section here, this inside box, is going to relate to the central polygon on our crate. Okay, so this is the top polygon, this is the bottom, and these are the slats that, or sorry, the central segments that run across the center of the crate. So we have to make the central bit fit here, and we have to make the outside bit kind of fit outside, as it were. Okay. Now there are many ways of doing this. The way I'm going to do it, you might sit there and think, oh, that's a bit silly, or perhaps it doesn't necessarily work for me. If you've used Photoshop before, feel free to just use whatever technique you can to get that in there. I'm going to show you how I do it, and I find this a pretty easy way of transferring that data across. So the first thing we need to do is we need to select the Marque Tool. And the one we're looking for is rectangular Marque Tool. If for whatever reason you've got one of these ones selected by default, all we have to do to change it back is hold left click and select rectangular Marque Tool. The other tools we're going to be using are the Move Tool, and pretty much like with any other program, just click on the tool you want to use and it should select that. We're also going to be using the Magic Eraser or the Magic Wand tool, depending on what you want to do. So, I'm going to select the Marque Tool, we're going to go into the diffuse base.jpg tab, and we're just going to select all of that. Okay? And we're going to press Ctrl C to copy that image, and we're going to come into our UV layer and we're going to press Ctrl V, and that should hopefully dump the image on our lap, as it were. We're then going to select the Move Tool, we're going to press Ctrl T on the keyboard, and what this is going to do is transform. Another way of getting to it is by going to Edit and clicking on Transform, okay, or Free Transform as it's known. Now hopefully if you've used Word before, or any kind of program, Paint, GIMP, whatever, you should hopefully be able to understand that these almost vertex-like things here, these handles, are going to be used to scale this image down. Okay, and we can scale it uniformly by holding Shift, or we can scale each axis separately by letting go of Shift and just waving this image around. Okay, and obviously it goes without saying, undoing and things like that within Photoshop is slightly different with than 3ds Max, because to undo and then redo is Ctrl Z. So if I make a mistake and I press Ctrl Z, if I keep pressing Ctrl Z, I'm just going to step back, step forward, step back, step forward. If I want to undo multiple times in a row, we're going to have to press Ctrl Alt and Z. If you don't like hotkeys, again, feel free to go to Edit and go to Undo. Okay, and then step backwards. This is the one you want. So Alt, Control, and Z. So what we're going to do is we're going to hold Alt and Shift, or just Shift if you like. If we press Alt Shift, we scale towards the pivot, which is in the center of our shape. So this bit here. If we just hold Shift, then we scale towards the corner. So it's completely up to you. Okay. So you can, if you want, position the crate, and feel free to use the arrow keys when you're in this format to just get the majority of that crate in the right place. And then, without holding any of the hotkeys, we're just going to drag this crate into place. And what we're looking for is for the outside of this box to not show any green lines. Okay? If I nudge this over for you, this is not what we're looking for. If we see any of these seams, they're going to show on the material within 3ds Max. Okay? And although that's not a problem, potentially, it's going to break, it's going to look tacky for the most part. So we need to make sure that we have covered all of the edges, and that goes for all of the edges we can see under here. Now the way that we're going to do this is we're going to keep the UV, if you like, as the background, and we can hide that separately. And then we're going to kind of stack things on top in layers. Okay. Now what we're going to do now is we're going to have a look at opacity, because I can't really tell if the edges of my crate here are actually in the right place. So that I can check, I'm going to reduce the opacity, and you should see that the corners of my crate are here, or the corners of the central section of my crate, and they should be here. So what we're going to do is we're going to select the Marque Tool again. We're going to select the inside portion of our crate, and we're going to press Ctrl X. And what that's going to do is essentially get rid of this section. We're then going to press Ctrl V, and that should give it to us on a new layer. We're then going to position this part of the crate in the correct place. Okay, and press enter. And hopefully, when we get rid of opacity on this level, we can see that it now looks like a crate essentially. And we know that they're in the right place because if we reduce that opacity, you can see how the borders of our crate do come up right up to this edge here. And this is important. Now the reason why we don't want this part of our crate going all the way up here is because where that bend is in our box, if I go back to 3ds Max I'll show you, where this bend is, we're going to have wood that bends up here, and although that's fine for the most part, nobody's probably really going to notice. If they do notice, it's going to look a bit weird, so that's why we make sure that the border comes right up to here. So I'm just going to reset that bit there. Now, the next step is to essentially merge these two layers again, now that we've got that right. So I'm going to merge them. To do that, I'm going to select both my layers. And within here, exactly the same as previously when we opened the file, if we hold Control, we can select multiple layers. Okay, and I'm just going to merge these layers down again. All right. And now they're separate, so we can move them around as one. So we've rescaled the size of this box. All right. Now, excuse me. Now the next step is to separate these out again. I know we've just combined them, but we're going to reselect this internal section. We're going to cut, we're going to paste, and we're just going to reposition it. Now the reason we're doing this is so that we can rearrange these layers. So we want the border above. Once we've done that, we're going to come to FX, and we're going to come to Drop Shadow. And ideally what we're looking for is to create this idea that this section of the crate is 3D. Because even though game engine shaders are becoming really, really good and shadow generation is awesome, sometimes it does need a little bit of help. And this will hopefully allow us to create the idea of shadow being generated here. Now this isn't a particularly good idea, this particular configuration for our drop shadow, because what we have is we have shadow on one part of our crate but not on the other. And unless you're going to have one light in the scene and every crate is going to be positioned in the same way, this can in some situations look pretty unrealistic. Alright? So there is a way that we can create a drop shadow that comes from all areas, or all angles if you like. To do that, we need to come into the drop shadow menu where it says layer style, and we need to change a few of these options. So the first thing we're going to do is turn off global light. And I'm not going to do this for any other reason than if we want to add any other drop shadows to the scene later on, if we use global light, what we're actually doing is changing the defaults, changing the presets for the entire image. And we don't want that. So we just want this drop shadow to be on the crate. So we're going to click that tick. We're going to change the angle to 0. We're going to change the distance to 1, and we're going to increase the spread. And hopefully what you should see, if we increase the spread and the size, we should see that shadow now being generated on all angles. Okay? Now, if for whatever reason your shadow looks lopsided, so you've got more shadow over this side than this side, then just change the angle over here to 180. And we can do that either by pressing 180 here, or we can just drag over the angle to this side. And sometimes that can make it look more even. Okay? And once we've done that, we're going to press OK. And that is essentially it for this part of the crate material. Once we've done that, we can merge them again. The next step is to copy this layer into the other parts of the cube. Now, because this has been modeled uniformly, if you like, everything should be the same size. So what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this layer. Now, we can do this in two ways. We can right-click on the layer itself and duplicate it, or we can actually Alt-drag down. Now, whenever we duplicate something, the program we're duplicating intends to give it sort of like a an appendix, if you like. So at this time it's going to be layer 1 copy 1 or layer 2 copy 2, etc. And that can be confusing. If you've got lots of layers, that can be really, really annoying. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this one, I'm going to rename this layer. So we just double click on layer 2, and I'm just going to call this crate face 1. And hopefully next it'll be crate face copy 1, etc. And depending on which order I copy them in, I should hopefully remember which one's which. So I'm going to copy this layer to this part. So I'm just going to hold Alt and drag, and I'm just going to position this in this section. Okay. And then we're just going to do the same again. I'm going to keep copying and pasting it out. Now, what you notice here is I'm getting lots of shadow. And this is because where we've copied it down, where we've created that shadow, it's not just done it inside, it's also done it on the outside too. Okay. So what we need to do is we need to go back and we need to select the Marque Tool again. And what we're going to do is we're just going to select the outside of this crate, and we're just going to delete the shadow that is outside here. So we're just going to marquee, press delete tool, delete key, and then we can move on. So once we've done that, again we can just alt drag down, and now you see hopefully it looks a little bit better. Okay. Spend a little bit of time just positioning these correctly. What we're looking for is that these corners kind of tile up, if that makes sense. We don't want them to be misaligned. We want them to be where they should be. So I'm just going to keep doing this. Keep copying and pasting them over. Okay, there we go. And that's basically it for our crate section here. Okay. The next step is to fill in our slats. Okay. Now it can be quite easy just to go, well, I'm just going to, get a wood texture and just paint that on, and it can be separate from the crate and it not be a problem. The problem with that is that it probably won't fit in our scene, if that makes sense. We have to make this slat fit this part of the crate. Now a way of doing that is by selecting the Marque Tool, and depending on what layer we're on, so just hide it and check what layer we're on. So hide it and reshape, then we know where we are. I'm just going to select a portion of this slat here. Okay, it doesn't matter which one it is, it can be any of them. If you like more detail, it can be this one here. Now I'm essentially just going to copy and paste that slat, select the move tool, I'm going to move it up. Okay, I'm going to press Ctrl T again. Now this time I'm not going to scale it straight away. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate it. You notice how my cursor changes. If I move to the corner here, I can scale, and we've already done that. If I want to rotate, what we're going to do is we're going to move the mouse outside of this box, and you'll notice that depending on where my mouse goes, I get a different rotate icon. Okay, and now if I click anywhere outside of this box, okay, I can rotate. Now those of you with steady hands, we're going to put this on 90, exactly 90. Alright, if you don't have steady hands or you can't be asked to look at the number for that long, feel free to hold shift and rotate, because it gives us a 15-degree angle snap. Okay, once we're here, it's just a case of positioning, okay, into one corner and scaling the same as you did before. Alright, and don't worry too much about pixelation at this point. Okay, it will fit, it will make sense. I mean, okay, so that's basically it for the diffuse element. Alright. The next step is to save this material, if you like, so that we can import it back into Photoshop. Oh, sorry, I mean 3ds Max. We can import this back. So we're going to go to File, Save As. The first thing we're going to save it as is a PSD, and we're going to call this crate_diffuse. Now the reason I'm going to save it as a PSD is because we want this layer detail kept intact. If we lose the file or it corrupts, we want to be able to go back. So I'm just going to save this. So that's the first save I'm going to make. Click OK. The second save, I'm going to come to File, Save As, and instead of a diffuse, I'm going to save it as a .bmp, and I'm going to keep that name. Okay, so crate_diffuse.bmp. I'm going to save that. I'm going to click OK, and then I'm going to come back into Photoshop. 3ds Max. Now at this point, hopefully, if you followed the previous tutorials, you should know where the material editor is, and you should know how to add that checker material. Now the method of getting our image on here is not too different. So we're going to go to Material Editor. We're going to select our tile test, alright? Or we can select the sphere next to it, it doesn't necessarily matter. And we're going to come to diffuse. So next to the diffuse box, next to the grey box, there's a box that's empty. It says none. So if you click on that, we get a dialog box pop up and we get loads of options. And we're going to click on bitmap this time. We're going to click on bitmap, and hopefully we should end up with 3ds Max's default selection of materials that it gives you. These are, if you're curious, for tutorial scenes that they include as part of the education version. Now we're going to navigate to where we've saved our crate tutorial, and the one I want is crate diffuse.bmp. So I'm just going to select this. When I click it when I left click once, you should see it appears down here as a little preview. I'm going to click OK or open, and I then get this on the texture sphere. The next thing to do is just to drag and drop this onto our crate. Okay, remember it goes grey, and if you watched the previous tutorial, you'll know that's because we haven't clicked Show Shaded Material in Viewport. So we're going to click that, and hopefully you should see that our crate material now appears as it should. Okay, so that's it. We have a crate material, which looks pretty cool. Okay, now if you're happy with that, then feel free to end the tutorial there and not worry too much about improving this or changing the realism or anything like that. And the first thing I want to show you is how we can see this doesn't look too unrealistic. If we zoom in here, we can see we have a little bit of stretching. When we zoom out, you don't really notice it too much. It's not a massive extent. Okay, now if you unwrapped your crate differently, you just have to make a few checks. The top and the bottom are fine as they are. We just need to make sure that the slats within, not these slats, but the individual wood planks within our material are all facing the same direction. Okay, so around this central section, make sure that they're all down. If you've got some horizontal ones, then you just need to go back into Photoshop, find out which slats are horizontal, which part of these are horizontal, and just Control-T, rotate them around. Now, if you are wanting to make this thing look slightly more realistic, okay, so we're going to change the way it looks perhaps. We're going to come back into Photoshop, and we're going to look at adding these decals, or detail images as I like to call them. And the process is essentially exactly the same as we use for the diffuse box. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to start with is this logo. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to select it all, Control-C, exactly the same as before, Control-V. Alright, now you'll notice that this image appears quite large. And if we just overlay this image on top of a crate, you'll see that we can't see anything behind it. This white space is a real pain in the backside. Now there are many ways of getting rid of this. Those of you that know Paint will literally go and get an eraser, the eraser tool, change it to 1 pixel, and you'll start rubbing out all the white stuff. If you don't value your time, then feel free to do that. I'm not going to stop you. If you want to do this slightly faster, there are 2 alternative methods you can use. If I can find it. The first one is the Magic Wand tool. Now, in CS3, the Magic Wand tool was really easy to find. In CS6 and 4 and 5, they changed it. So where it says Quick Selection Tool here, W, we're going to hold-click that Magic Wand, and we're just going to select that white space. And you can see different segments of the image. We're going to select it and press Delete on your keyboard, and you should hopefully see that the image disappears. Okay, so now we have this black section of our image. If you have some pathological fear of the Magic Wand tool, as I know I have colleagues that do and don't like doing it, feel free to hold click down on the eraser tool and come to Magic Eraser, and this saves milliseconds because it does exactly the same as the Magic Wand tool does, but it means you don't have to press the delete key on your keyboard. Okay. Now once we've done this, I'm gonna rename my layer. I've got a layer 1 here. I'm just going to rename that as slats so that I know what that is. And with layer 2, this is my East India Trading Company logo, so I'm just going to call it EICL. And hopefully that I will understand what that means. The next process is to transfer this down. Okay, I'll transform this, make this smaller. I'm just going to press enter when we're done, not alt, enter. And we're going to position this in top left hand corner of one of our boxes, or one of our slats. Okay, now normally I would just make you just dump these in any old order, but because I don't want to have to go back and redo it over and over again, I'm just going to come back into 3ds Max. I'm going to open up the UV editor and find out which way the slats are slanting. which way these are slanting. And the reason I say that is because where we position our logo, it could well be obscured by the slats. So for example, this one goes from left to right, whereas the one next to it goes from right to left. So basically, I've got to put one East India logo there. The next one I'm going to have to put the other side. Okay, and this one here, yeah. So what this essentially translates to is I have to do this. And hopefully that should be fine. Once you've done that, feel free to just save. Again, save as a PSD first. You want to make sure that you're saving regularly. We don't want to compress everything down into a bitmap and then have to go back and save it, or go back and have to break up those layers again. So please save as a PSD as often as you can. We're then going to go back to File, Save As, and Bitmap. You will get used to doing this. Now, with these changes made, if you are unsure about these changes and you're not necessarily sure how they're going to look, don't overwrite the original diffuse. Feel free to call it _1 or diffuse test or anything. I'm happy with these changes, so I'm just going to double click on diffuse. Okay, keep all the settings same. When I go back to 3ds Max, it's probably going to bounce around for a little bit. If you have a slightly slower machine, it will take a little bit of time, because what happens is it automatically detects that the material has been updated, and it re-imports it. Alright, so certainly if you're using a really high resolution image, or you've got a slow machine, then the chances are it will take a little bit of time at this point. Now you notice that I have my my logo now appears here, which is great, and it kind of adds a little something to my crate. The problem that you can probably see is that it's pixelated. Alright, now the one thing I want to make clear is that when we render this out, this will appear as it does in Photoshop. Now if I press F9 now, I zoom in, press F9, you'll see that it does appear as it should, okay? The realistic viewport shader in 3ds Max dials down the resolution of these materials because it wants to save memory, alright? And because it wants to render this for speed. It's on the fly rendering rather than accuracy. So now that we know where these logos show, we can come back to the Photoshop, and then we can start adding in our T logos. Okay. Now, before we do that, I'm going to continue just pasting these into the right place. Now, with the top and the bottom, we have to make sure that, because remember the slats for top and the bottom come across, they're a cross section. So I'm just going to have 2 there, and I'm going to have 2 at the bottom. Okay. What I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to select all of these layers, and I'm going to merge them. Because what I want to do is I want to change all of these layers into some. Well, I want to change all of these so that they blend in. As you can see, having this little white border can be a real pain in the backside. It doesn't necessarily look like it should be there. It looks like a new crate. You want to make this look slightly more tattered. There are many ways of doing this, but the easiest way I found is to come to opacity and just reduce that opacity a little bit. You kind of see how that makes it look slightly worn. Alright. The next section is we're going to come to the T logo. So if we want to go back up to that tab up the top there, we're going to go through exactly the same process. We're going to copy it, come back to diffuse paste, and we're going to go through the same process as we did before. So we're going to get the magic eraser tool, or the eraser tool, or the magic brush, or wand, and we're just going to click out some of these sections. And then feel free to come into the text up the top here. This is a little time consuming, I agree. But once we've done it, it'll look awesome, so it won't matter. Okay, so there we go. Now, exactly the same thing happens. But instead of me just pasting this in the corner, I'm happy for this to span the entirety of these crates, if you know what I mean. So, across the central sections, I want these to appear in the bottom. I don't mind if the slats obscure them. But before we do, we're going to do exactly the same thing as we did with these logos. We're just going to reduce the opacity a little bit. Okay? And you should hopefully see that it kind of looks more realistic. And what we're trying to get is for it to kind of blend with this one here. If you're not happy with the text here, feel free to duplicate that layer. As you kind of see that it makes it, we can makes it a little tiny bit clearer. We're then going to merge these layers again, and again, feel free to just reduce the opacity so that it matches. Okay, so once we've done that, we're then going to begin the copy and paste routine. It becomes exactly the same exercise essentially. Alright, so I'm just going to paste these across. Paste these across, here we go. And then in the top here, I'm going to paste them across the center. Okay? I want to state at this point I don't actually have any shares in Yorkshire tea. There are plenty of other tea brands out there that you can choose from. And once we've done that, we're going to file, save as, same thing, save as a PSD first, etc. Okay. Then I'm going to come back here, save as, bitmap. Okay, just get used to that process. Click OK, OK. And then we're going to come back to 3ds Max, and it should already have loaded that in, and hopefully you can see that that has pasted in there well. Okay. And up the top here, not the bottom. Feel free again to press F9. This is the render, and you should kind of see what it looks like there. Alright. Now, the next thing I'm going to show you is kind of incredibly specific. We're not going to need any more of these, so we can close every layer except the one that we've got. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how we can turn this photorealistic texture into something slightly more stylized. Now, if that kind of is what you want to do, is what you're going for, what we need to do is we need to kind of select all of these. And I know I've been very bad and I've ignored my own rule. I haven't given these their own unique name, but hopefully you have, because you're probably going to be better than me at this soon. The more you do it, the better you get. We're going to select them all. We're going to duplicate the layers. Okay, just click OK, and then with them still selected, we're going to merge. And what that basically does is gives us a top, if you like. All of these are then underneath, nothing above. We can turn them off. You see, we don't notice any changes. There's no difference. Now, this is what we're going to do if we just want to make it slightly more stylized. We're going to come to image. Sorry, not image. We're going to go to filter. And what we need to do is we need to sharpen this up. So we're going to turn this from almost like a CryEngine material into something like perhaps like a Borderlands-y material, something similar to that. Filter. We're going to go to sharpen, and we're going to sharpen twice. Okay, I know that seems a ridiculous process, but this is what we're looking for. We really want to accentuate our material. Okay, so we're going to sharpen twice. Then we go to filter, noise, and we're going to despeckle twice. Okay, and hopefully you should see that takes away some of the photorealistic detail. Now, you can keep it there. If you're happy with that, feel free to keep it there. The last step is to do something called a smart blur. So we're going to go to filter again, blur, and this time we're going to go to smart blur here, which is the second one from the bottom. And depending on how you change the settings, okay, you change the radius, it basically increases threshold, exactly the same thing. You kind of see what happens here. Okay, the closer the radius and the threshold are, the less drastic things are. So if I keep the radius at 0.1 and decrease the threshold to 100, nothing really happens. As soon as I start increasing that radius, you kind of see that things become incredibly blurry. So I'm going to keep my radius at 6.1, and I'm just going to gently increase this to 17.4, 17.5. And I'll go to quality and I'll click high. Okay, you kind of see that gives me a little bit more clarity. Maybe reduce my threshold a little bit. Again, maybe reduce my radius. Once I've done that, I'm going to click OK. And you should notice that now it turns more cartoony. Okay, and this is a really good way of kind of prototyping really stylized materials. So we're going to come to File, we're going to come to Save As. Again, feel free to save over that diffuse. Remember, we can turn this off, and we get back to our original. We can also, if you like, begin to experiment with layer blending by coming up to where it says normal here and changing the way that it interacts with the layer below. So you can kind of see how we can get some really cool looking effects, really stylized effects still, but some really cool looking effects. Obviously, there are some blending tools that just ruin everything. You can kind of see, so again, linear dodge gives us kind of a very a high exposure, if you like, but it's still pretty stylized. And that looks like the normal one. Okay, so feel free to have a play around with that. I'm gonna keep to this for now. I'm just gonna go to File, Save As. I'm gonna save over that Create Diffuse, because remember, we can undo this. We're not actually losing any of that previous material. It's still all there. I'm then going to go to File, Save As, and then Bitmap. And we're going to just, I'm not going to save over that diffuse, but I'm just going to call this one create underscore diffuse underscore style. And hopefully that should, I'll remember that that's the stylized one. Click Save, click OK. And then I'm going to go back to 3ds Max and just show you the difference between the two. Okay? So I'll just shift drag this out. And I'll apply a new material. I'll apply our stylized material that we just created. I'm going to drag this on there. Now I'll render this out. I hope you can already see the difference, but if I render this for you now, you can kind of see the major differences between the two. Okay, if I zoom in and give you a slightly clearer render, and there you have it. Okay, so that pretty much concludes this section of the tutorial and the entire Create tutorial. Feel free to ask any questions in the comments below, or if you don't like it, scream abuse at me. If you do like it, scream compliments, etc. But other than that, I'll see you again soon.